Hello, my name is Michael Yeager. Welcome to this Contemporary Teaching Videos lesson on grief, a reaction to loss in addiction recovery. I've been a therapist in the addiction recovery field since 1973, and I got involved very specifically with this type of grief work through my involvement with a man named John James, who wrote the Grief Recovery Handbook, which is the text for this course. But my first inclinings that grief was something that needed to be done, that type of work when we're working with alcoholics at least, was back in 1978 when I was in Castle Rock, Colorado, and I was attending a board meeting and I was listening to the priest talk to some grievers downstairs just in between the meeting. And I said, it sounds like those people's reaction to death is very similar to the alcoholic's reaction to losing alcohol. So it was that information that started me to begin to notice some things about grief. Fort Logan, a mental health center in Denver, Colorado, was doing some work with grievers, and they had a lot of papers at the time, and I began to study that whole phenomena. But John James really expanded my understanding of what grief work is about. And there's information at the end of the tape to go to his school to become a certified grief recovery counselor, something that I did for myself a couple of years ago. That has been one of the very best things I have done. It really helped me understand how to do closure work more effectively with people in a variety of areas. And in this lesson today, we will be talking about grief as a reaction to loss in addiction recovery, but also how people respond to loss, variety of losses in their life, and take you through the process. And the text that I referenced, not just for the textbook, but also the other books that are referenced at the end, I certainly encourage you to get those and to begin to study this process, because I think it's sorely lacking in our profession. And I got into grief recovery work not because of my primary interest in survivors of people who had lost someone through death, but in my work with survivors of sexual abuse and incest. I was noticing that these survivors were just that. They were survivors. They were still living their lives on those old beliefs, those old angers and those old hurts, and they weren't moving on. And this is in some cases after years of therapy. So something wasn't happening. And what I began to find out was that even though the feelings were being stirred up and people were discharging emotion, there was no completion. They didn't have the tools to say goodbye and to release it, which is what then got me to create this course on grief as it relates to addiction recovery. And again, this isn't alcoholism recovery, this is addiction recovery. And these processes can be used, and I've used them very effectively in trauma units in hospitals, in addiction treatment programs in hospitals, as well as in my private practice and intensive weekends. So I know from personal and professional experience how well this works. This tape, I also want to say, and there's reference at the end, is dedicated in loving memory to my father, Francis Scott Yeager, who died a couple of years ago. And the experience that I had when he died, when he passed, was absolutely phenomenal. It was the most powerful, life-enhancing experience I ever had. And I'm not talking about discounting my sadness, but just the life that happened as I was willing to experience the emotion. So hopefully you'll get a flavor of that as we go through this lesson today. And like I say, I really encourage you to continue on with this work, or if you're interested, I do workshops on this and would glad to come to your city or country over in Canada in order to do this work for you. So we're going to start with a definition. Grief is a normal, natural reaction to loss. It's, as John James states, a conflicting mass of human emotion that occurs when you reach out to someone or something that's always been there for you, and you reach out one last time and it's not there. It's just not there. And it's those feelings that well up inside the individual that are the grief reaction. And it's those feelings that we need to learn to embrace whenever it's time for the individual. There is no set time to grieve. Time doesn't heal all wounds. Time just passes. That's a myth, and we'll talk more about myths in a while. But In this process of grief recovery, we need to look at it and frame it, particularly in the addiction field, when we're working with addicts of all types, not alcoholism, but all types of addicts, all types of abuse victims, that for the purposes of this work, we do not pay any attention to their addiction. We do not pay any attention to the things that happen to them. We move away from any labels, psychological labels that we may have laid on them, and understand and then convey that understanding to them that for the purposes of this work, they're grievers. There's nothing wrong with them. They don't need to be fixed. What they need is a safe environment for them to heal, for them to experience that natural set of emotions that comes up automatically when people finally get in touch with the idea that this person, place, or thing, real or imagined, that had always been there, isn't there. That can be an idea. People can grieve the loss of an idea. When working with survivors of sexual abuse or incest, and they may have held on to an idea that said that those people were there for me just that one time, just these few times here, or that their connection with that person was about the abuse. And when they release that, sadness, anger, hurt, and pain occur very naturally, if we'll just let it blip out, so to speak, in this very natural process of grief. So it's our mindset when we work with grievers that needs to be adjusted. The 12 steps of any of the 12-step programs do not work with grief, because grief isn't an addiction. Grief isn't a pathological behavior. It's not something that we need to get over. It's not a disease. It's a normal, natural response. The 12 steps were designed to help people recover from disease and dysfunction. Grief is not about that. It's a normal, natural response or reaction to loss. So it's important that you understand that concept as you move into using grief work with clients, because it's not about their relationship to their depression or to their addictive behavior or to their abuse. It's not about that. It's about that normal, natural reaction to the loss. So keep that in mind as we move through this process. In the grief experience, and again, there's been numerous books written about this, and I'll be talking about some of the experiences that seem to occur that have been noticed. We've got disbelief, numbness, and denial is a level to look at when the griever is in that process of grief. And it's a way, I believe, of the body, mind, and soul, so to speak, protecting the individual from the trauma, from the blow, from that reality. So there's going to be a cloud for a period of time in the griever's reality. And we have to simply be aware of that, notice it, and adjust accordingly, and work with them and ask them specific questions like, tell me what happened. And what that can do is help them work through the disbelief by giving them permission to talk about what occurred, to then create belief out of what happened, to move it away from a fantasy, a reality, or a situation that didn't really occur into reality. There's going to be anger, guilt, bargaining, some other things that might occur in the griever's reality. It's important simply to let people have their feelings, whatever they happen to be. If they need to bargain, simply support them in that bargaining process. Maybe the bargaining is intermixed with anger or with guilt. If only I would have been there, then that wouldn't have happened. I'd gladly give my life and attempt to bargain for theirs. If only I would have known better, then that wouldn't have happened there. So simply work with them and support them in that process as they move back and forth in, again, this conflicting mass of human emotion. A lot of things are going to be coming up very naturally, very normally, as they should in a grief process. And by having an environment for people to experience what is happening naturally will help them flow through a very uncomfortable time in their life. Fear, anxiety, and depression. These are also going to show up when people begin to tap into their own sense of mortality, or maybe they'll fear for their own life if they're experiencing grief as a result of a murder and their loved one was murdered. They may begin to fear for their own life. Fear particularly around a robbery. I've been robbed a couple of times in my life, and I experienced fear about going into that place as a reaction to my loss of possession. So, and then when my father died, there was also fear of what will happen to me. If he is in fact dead, then that means eventually I will die. So all these fears, or a variety of fears, can come up. And someone could certainly, and I've certainly observed it as well in trauma, when people get stuck in this fear and create anxiety and have anxiety attacks, instead of, and again, the value of an anxiety attack to block the process of grief is that they can then shift focus from the feelings they had over here of the loss into this anxiety attack, which again tends to numb out feelings or behavior. Sadness, depression, isolation, sense that there's no one there. It could bring up someone's abandonment issues. I'll talk more about that in a while, but that isolation, that no one can get to me. Even that sense, wow, when Papa died, I remember driving down the street, and we were in the limousine, and the whole world was doing what it was doing, and I felt isolated and apart from the world because they weren't involved with this deep grief that I was having. Even when I got off, when I've worked with people and they've gotten off chemicals, and they say, well, nobody really understands me, because they're all caught up in their grief response to the losses that have occurred. Their sense of security is gone, and that creates that sense of isolation and aloneness. It's an insulation as well that stops them again from feeling the full impact of the experience. Confusion and disorientation certainly are normal responses to occur. Forgetting, not having to write notes to remember to do certain things, not knowing where you are, what day of the week it is, what house you're in, can certainly occur in this process of grief, since it's a conflicting mass of human emotion. And again, the severity of the grief is always in direct proportion to the importance of that loss. And so disorientation for a period of time is certainly very normal and to be expected, as well as confusion. And here what people need is support. They don't need to be told there's something wrong with you for being disoriented. You should be able to get over it quickly. What's wrong? They need support in that process, just to kind of wrestle through that and to work through it. There's also a need for some kind of ritual. I need to do something in order to affect change and recovery. We have rituals for grief resolution. When people grieve the loss of their single life and become married, we have the marriage ritual, which allows people to grieve or to move through loss of one lifestyle so they can replace it and have another. We have the burial ritual when people die, and that gives people an opportunity to go somewhere, to do a specific thing, to say specific things, and to have everything okay within a structure of an environment. And that ritual again helps them heal. On the addiction recovery tape I talk about ritual as well, and the ritual of any of these things, the grief ritual, the funeral, the marriage ritual, the divorce ritual of going to court, although we have very few rituals other than going through court for divorce and no rituals for separation, allows the individual a process to have their feelings and to create some kind of a safe environment. And we'll talk more later on about creating or helping to create very effective recovery rituals for grievers of all types of loss. And again, that gives them an opportunity to do something specifically with their feelings so they can have a sense of empowerment in the midst of this confusion that's going on. When the loss occurs, the grief reaction depends upon the griever's perception. How do they perceive this loss? And again, this perception is going to be set up for them by family, by their own history, by relationships they're having with whatever person, place, or thing is leaving them, by their relationship to it, by how they have perceived, by the lessons they've been given in life about how they should or shouldn't handle a particular situation. It also their belief system, how they see themselves as a human being, about being empowered enough to honestly tell their emotional truth, will affect their ability to move through their grief recovery process. How they interpret the loss, how they interpret that particular loss, what does it mean to them? And all of this will then lead into their reaction to that particular event. Remember, loss in and of itself is meaningless until the griever attaches a meaning to it. I tell you out there that my father, Francis Yeager, died. That means nothing to you because you don't know my father. Although those of you that had a close relationship with your father when he died will react and respond one way. Those of you that had a very estranged relationship with your father will have a completely different reaction to news of someone else's father's death. Those of you whose fathers are still alive will react and respond a different way. Those of you whose fathers have been dead years ago and you have effectively completed that relationship will react and respond to that same bit of information in a different way. And I challenge you to even have your patients do this. Go home and read the obituaries. And notice when it comes to death through murder, when children die, when parents die, when pets die, when people get clean and sober, go through the obits. When the marriages, go through those loss experiences. Notice your lack of feeling about the information on the paper. If you're not in relationship with the person, place, or thing that's there, you'll not have a powerful reaction to that loss. But some of you say, but wait a minute, when my father died, or when my cousin died, or when my sister died, or when my brother died, or my wife died, I had no reaction at all. But when the pet died 6 months later, I went crazy. What this is dissociation. It's these feelings were too great to have, so you put them over here. Again, if this is less meaningful and maybe it's more time away from here, it's more acceptable to have the lost reaction over here. So we have to look at things in context to help define for us and the griever exactly how they are responding to these losses. Let's look at some typical male coping skills for grief. Again, men in grief don't do very well. The times that I've put on seminars about men in grief, very few men show up. So I certainly agree that men have a very difficult time with expressing their emotions. Well, I'm not saying that women are the best grievers. I'm just saying that women tend to be given more permission in our society to express feelings of sadness. Men will tend to react in silence and to hold feelings in and to undergo and to live as if the belief were true that big boys don't cry. Now, when Pop died, I certainly had to struggle with this. Not very long, but it was certainly a question that came up in my head about expressing emotion in an honest fashion. Again, because society had taught me, my family, my father had taught me not to express tears of sadness or really of joy, but just to keep everything inside. So these lessons are ingrained in men significantly stronger than women. In the silence and holding things in, there's also that whole idea of isolation increases, that there's going to be solitary grief, like they can go off and have their feelings by themselves. John Gray, in his book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Men, Women, and Relationships, and What You Feel You Can Heal, those 3 texts, talks about men going off to their caves, so to speak, and having their feelings there. Whereas the women want to have their feelings with their man and just out in public, men tend to want to move away from others and have their grief in silence. I was not that kind of griever, although those thoughts were certainly a part of my mind as I went through my grief experience with my father. There's also, men want to take some kind of action, be physical in some way. Women don't seem to get caught up in that the same way men do. but men are action-oriented. We've been programmed that way to go do something. I must do something. I think it's a power and control issue for men as well. And so you'll notice that they want to go out and do. The other value of doing is that it can certainly support their repression of emotion, because now they're caught up in this activity out here. Haven't we read many, many stories where people have, let's say, where there was a violent death or that kind of thing occurred, and the husband or the father or the boyfriend was out there trying to take some kind of legal action to become consumed, so to speak, with this outside activity. And in that consumption of activity, the individual doesn't have to be with themselves and to experience these feelings as they come up. That can be very frightening for someone that has never been given permission to experience intense feelings within self. Also, addictive behavior certainly can be a reaction to loss, which is why it's so important to look at someone's losses when we're assessing them for their addictive behaviors. When did the losses occur? What were the losses? Were it family? Were it friends? What's their reaction to losing the chemical? Addiction kills or nullifies or negates or moves people away from emotion, takes them away, allows them not to feel that relationship with self. So addiction can certainly be one of the coping skills that you will find someone getting into addictive behaviors as a result of a reaction to loss in their life. That might be one of the critical events that occurred in their life that set them up for addictive behavior. It was too much for me to handle. When my wife died, when my child died, when my parents died, I couldn't handle it. There was no way for me to express anything, so I got into alcohol. I got into Valium. My doctor said take some Valium so I could sleep. Again, not to bad rap medicine, but medicine has been notorious for killing emotion with medication. Better living through chemistry. Really, it's better death through chemistry is what happens, because people aren't allowed to experience their reality. It's like medication takes the individual's responsibility away from them to experience who they are. And I'm not saying that medication doesn't have its needs, it certainly does, but sometimes there is a possibility of it being abused, particularly if people are very afraid of experiencing those emotions. Some typical female coping skills to grief. Again, women tend, as a rule, to express emotion more effectively than men. But sometimes they might go on and on and on and work into a depression. And that depression, although at some levels for a period of time is certainly very normal, if it's stayed into for months and months on end, this certainly is a self-defeating behavior and is again stopping, and in some ways is a block to experiencing all the feelings that are there. So they might use the depression as a smokescreen, because people will accept depression. Maybe that'll leave them alone to increase their sense of isolation, so no one is trying to get into their space to help them experience their feelings. Women might also tend to experience a loss of sense of self. If they have lost who they are in relationship to the person, thing, or event that is now no longer in their life, and they've lost themselves to that relationship, very probably they're going to experience that sense of loss of themselves as a human being, which can certainly feed into low self-esteem, lack of self-worth. Suicidal thoughts may occur as a result of that. If you're not in my life, then I am nothing. I have no reason to be here. It's also interesting with men and women, particularly if they haven't had a lot of activities outside of the relationship, that sometimes, for no medical reason, when one spouse dies, the other spouse dies very shortly thereafter. Back to men, it's also very interesting to notice the death rate of males who retire. Their death rate is considerably higher than women who also reach retirement age, because women tend to have a life of their own outside of work. But because men aren't given permission to grieve the loss of a lifestyle, of their work, they're given a golden watch and that's it, or that you just hit that age and all of a sudden it's gone, that they tend to not have a reason for living. which now could also help us put this experience of loss of sense of self up to men as well. It certainly fits in both categories. Abandonment issues will surface, or certainly can surface. This person, if it's a loss of someone that's close, might bring up all of their old abandonment issues that now in relationship, I can't really rely on you because my mother died when I was 5, or because my father died, or because there was a divorce and they left me. And so when death occurs or when another relationship looks like it's going to end or does end, all these abandonment issues certainly may surface again. And again, women are as prone as men to get into addictive pathological relationships with people, things, or events that kill, nullify, change, or alter their emotions. So women can certainly get into addiction, whether it be eating disorders. A lot of times that is a drug of choice for women, as they begin to stuff themselves, to stuff the feelings down. Maybe it's Valium, maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's relationship addiction that happens in an attempt to replace the loss. Again, part of another myth that people are taught, that we can in fact replace loss. We really can't. We can bring someone or something else in, but we'll never have, this is the key thing, when grief, again it's a reaction to loss, that means that the relationship as it was will never be there again. Ever. It's never going to happen. Ever, ever, ever going to happen. And I emphasize those points on purpose, because a lot of times people might think they're doing their grieving, but they're not really into it because they haven't released the idea that they can have it again someday, because they can't. Even if they replace it with another person tomorrow at 2 o'clock, that other person is not this person. Even if it's a chemical, that other chemical isn't this chemical. If it's a lifestyle, this new lifestyle isn't what this one was. So grief is limited to that reaction to loss. And so addictive behavior certainly can come in there to stop people from experiencing those feelings. As I stated earlier, Dr. John Gray identifies 4 warning signs of depression. Now, I'll go through his text, What You Feel, You Can Heal, and again, this is referenced at the end of the tape, so you can pick this up and read more about it. But what he states is that the first sign is resistance. And it's when you numb yourselves and the individual will not allow themselves to have any of the feelings associated with the loss. But when people are numbing out and they're resisting feelings, they're also resisting good feelings. So it's not just the negative feelings that leave. Resistance occurs when you notice yourself starting to resist something another person is saying, doing, or feeling. You start criticizing them in your mind. This is about resistance to what's happening in the situation. If we don't tell people about resistance, then a very natural progression in this evolution is that little resentments build up, and those little resentments turned into big resentments. And as I've heard defined before, resentment, definition for resentment is that it's re-feeling old hurts. So if we resist the feelings, then we move into resentment. Now there's anger. It's a much more intense feeling. It's an intense dislike or blame for some other person for what they're doing. Resentment is usually accompanied by an internal experience of anger and tension. If we don't tell the truth about the resentment, it usually builds up and moves into the next phase called rejection. Rejection, or the signs of rejection, are not wanting to be with your partner, or always polarizing with the opposite point of view, fantasizing about other people, or having affairs. So in reaction to this rejection, that means that we're going to push away, this person is pushing away and moving away from it and thinking they can replace it out here somewhere else. This one's so bad I'll find it over here. And if that doesn't work anymore, and usually it doesn't, it never does, then it turns into repression. And repression is a state of emotional numbness where the individual no longer can tolerate any of their emotions, and they numb out. They numb out in this repression. And again, numbing out can be in the form of addiction. Numbing out can be in the form of depression. Numbing out can come in the form of phobias. Numbing out, in this case, can come in the form of continuing acting out in a lot of behaviors. It can come out in the form of anxiety, reactions, a lot of different things that people can do to continue to repress all of the feelings that they don't want to feel anymore. This is a soul death that's occurring within the individual. So we've got this loss over here, but because of their inability to experience their feeling, now another loss is occurring, this loss of sense of self. Addictive behaviors help to kill or dull the pain of life experiences that the person was not allowed to have when their original feelings about. If the pain is not resolved, the addict will usually become addicted to something or someone else. Again, this is a line that I spoke about in the tape on addiction, recovery, causes, and conditions. But again, the value of addiction here is that the individual can continue to push down all the feelings that they didn't want to have when the loss occurred. And as long as those feelings are repressed, the individual does not have the ability to really fully and experience the vibrancy that life has to offer. And so this creates this other kind of loss of self. Myths that society has perpetrated upon all of us. And these go back ages and ages and ages. In America today, we're not given permission to experience our loss. If there's a death in the family, generally industry is nice and they give us about 3 days to get it handled, so to speak. If there's a divorce, we might be given permission to get drunk a little bit or to be a little bit ditzy for a while, but really not take off any time from work. If there's a separation, no one is allowed to have really any feelings about it. In fact, something's wrong with you. Society immediately says you should go out and replace it. And think about it, the whole idea of replacing the loss. How many of you were taught that when your first love, back when you were a little kid, when he or she left your life, how many of you were told the guppy story, like there's more fish in the sea? And so we're told those things that we can replace the loss. We can't replace the loss. When that first bicycle was stolen, I remember mine. It was one of those huge Schwinn bicycles, weighed about 10,000 pounds, and it was chained to this tree. And I took it over to my friend's house, and somebody had cut the chain, and I had to walk home. And my father was not very happy with me, but he eventually said, "Don't worry about it, we'll just get you a new one on Saturday." So we're taught very young by very well-meaning people that we can replace losses. Losses simply cannot be replaced. Again, even if we get a new one, we can't replace it. Another myth that we're taught is that time heals all wounds. Well, to check this out, I've asked people, and I ask you to ask your clients, how many of you are holding on to unresolved feelings from losses that occurred more than a couple of hours ago? Usually people raise their hands. Then I stretch it and I say, how many of you are still experiencing feelings about losses that occurred in your life 2 to 5 years ago? Usually a number of hands go up. Then I ask, how many of you are still experiencing unresolved feelings of grief and loss from losses that occurred in your life 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, depending on how old the audience is. It's amazing how many hands show up. Time doesn't heal anything. That's a myth that we have been taught, because people out there in the world, people around the griever, they don't want to hear about the pain of the loss. They're very uncomfortable with it. So they help perpetrate a myth onto the griever to distort their thinking process. Grievers want to help other people feel comfortable, this overwhelming sense of need to be helpful to other people. And again, that's a good way for them not to have to really get into their feelings. But in this whole idea that time heals all wounds, just look around. We've got people that are still angry and resentful and hurt and sorrowful and terrified about things that occurred a long, long time ago. They won't be in relationship with people now today because of a relationship that ended 10 years ago, and they don't want to experience that kind of pain again. So I'm here to say that time doesn't heal anything. Time just passes. See, in order for us to be in a relationship, that means that we have had to do something to be in that relationship. So, conversely, if we're going to heal, grieve our losses, that means that we must do something to actively involve ourselves with the healing process, which doesn't just mean passively sitting around and waiting to heal. It means doing something, engaging in that process. And if the griever is engaged in that process, doing the work of recovery, which is really, very simply, telling the truth about how they feel all the time, and if they're doing that work, that combined with time will carry them through that process. There are a lot of studies, again, that show that different losses seem to take different periods of time. I'm not disputing that it takes time to heal. What I'm disputing is the myth that states that time heals all wounds. It's what we do with time that's important. What we actively do to engage in this grieving process. So that's a myth that I think we need to educate people about and help them understand that time doesn't do anything but pass. Replacing the loss. I talked about that a little bit when I was talking about the bicycle and about the girlfriend. We can't replace the loss. You know, that might work for a tangible item like a bicycle, and you get another bicycle, but in reality, this new bike, even though it looks just like this old bike, you don't have the relationship with this new bike that you do the old one. Isn't it interesting about pets, children and pets? You may have experienced this. That when that first pet died, and your parents were sad, and they helped you bury it or helped you take care of it and all that, and then they went out pretty quick and bought you a new one, trying to replace the loss. And it's interesting how that second pet didn't quite have the feelings given to it or shown to it that the first one did. And that's, I think, because we try to not have a reality and immediately gloss over it with something else. Nothing wrong with the second pet. There's nothing wrong with getting another pet or getting another bicycle. The problem is that the myth is out there that states that somehow this will make this loss less hurtful. And I'm here to submit that if we can have all the hurt and all the feelings that are appropriate or that are truthful about this loss, that when we get something different, it will be significantly more meaningful than this first one, because we've completed this relationship, which means we can start to create a new relationship over here. And that's not replacing the loss, because now there is no expectation that this new relationship be there to replace this one. So that this one can have a beginning and an ending as appropriate. And when that ending is there, then a new one can start, so that you can have a unique relationship there. And it's also interesting how we work with people and they get out of one relationship, it doesn't work, only to get into another one, only to get into another one. Going through all these relationships, trying to complete a relationship that they had with someone way back here. Maybe their abuser, a parent, a family member, a friend that hurt them in childhood. And instead of telling the truth about this relationship, they continue to repeat. It's like Terry Kellogg says, we will repeat what we don't complete. And so we move through life trying to complete this history with this relationship. Now, that's definitely not near as painful as going back and having these feelings, but it certainly doesn't work. So in grief recovery, the process would be to notice what's incomplete about this original relationship, have feelings about that, and then go on to this relationship, have feelings about that, go on to this relationship and have feelings about that. So there can be a sense of completion with each relationship. Does that mean that it's over and done with? Not at all. But it does put people in a process of beginning to move towards some kind of health and recovery. So we need to move through the myths as well as hide from your feelings. That goes into the whole idea of isolation. We cannot hide from these feelings. We can bury them, we can repress them, We can do a lot of things we can't hide from our relationship with self. Now I'll move into, again, why I got into this tape initially, which is surviving the loss of innocence, trust, and safety that resulted from abuse, incest, or violence. And it's how to have the feelings that actually occurred when that loss happened, when that loss of innocence, trust, and safety occurred. By going back and noticing how you felt, how the patient felt at the time of the abuse. Have them write down very specifically, and I'll talk about this, the process in the next half, in the next 50 minutes. But it's about noticing and really counting, helping the person count the value of losing that trust, the value of losing that innocence. And what did that mean to them to lose that sense of safety? And how has that loss continued to affect them, their life from that point on? What kind of an effect has it had in their life to lose those very, very precious, precious things that we really need to be in a relationship? So in the process of noticing and surviving the loss, and again, survival isn't life, survival is a technique that people do to get them through a simple set of, or a certain set of circumstances to allow them to still be here and breathe air on the planet, but not really to embrace the vibrancy of life. So it is about survival. Surviving the loss of a spouse. There's going to be a lot of unexpressed feelings that need to be expressed in this process. And these can be unfinished business that you might still have with the spouse. A lot of times people will get drunk, they'll get into another relationship, they'll get depressed, they'll try to get their needs met through their kids, they'll do a lot of things not to really express their feelings that they had for that spouse. It's going to get people to look at their own mortality issues. It's going to create a whole set of unique circumstances because now they're going to have to rely on themselves, whereas in the past they had this other person to share experiences, to share problem solving with. And now none of that is going to work for them anymore. So they're all of a sudden put in a whole new set of circumstances. If, let's say, in any couple, and let's say the one that has taken care of the funds dies and is never allowed or it's never worked out for the other partner to take care of the money issues. And in older couples, you're going to see that a lot, that now the spouse, the female spouse, has a lot of new issues to contend with and to handle money she has never handled it before. So possibly one of the recovery modes there, she feels stupid, she feels bad, she doesn't know what to do, is going to teach you some fiscal responsibility, how to do a checkbook, how to set up a budget, real simple things like that, or how to get it set up. But again, they may not have the knowledge base to deal with these things. They've had that reliance on someone else all that time. When we experience the loss of a parent, this is something that I can certainly talk about personally. When my dad died, it forces the person to get in touch with their own sense of immortality. That whole myth that mom and dad will live forever is confronted directly. Loss of home, particularly if the children are young. And I was already out of the house, but there's still that thought that when Pop's dead, now when Mom dies, where is home? There is no home. I'm orphaned, is some things that people have told me they have said when both parents die. It's the whole idea of the whole identity. I'm not these people's kid anymore. I'm an orphan. I don't have parents. I don't have this person anymore. I don't have that identity. Dealing with unfinished business with the parent is an issue that certainly comes up. And there's also a memorializing process that occurs. I want to spend a few minutes on dealing with the unfinished business. This is something that I experienced and I want to share with you that was very, very powerful in a recovery ritual for me when my father died. There were things in our relationship that we couldn't resolve in life, in his life. And I was there at the hospital when he died. And when I went into the room after we had found out that he was dead, my family came in and we were there together and then everybody left. I stayed with my father. And I did the work that I'm talking to you about in this lesson and experienced a tremendous amount of freedom and closure. Very, very powerful experience. And in the unfinished business, it's about noticing what it is you still need to say. And I noticed that for years he had blocks and barriers and I had blocks and barriers that neither of us could get through in life. And so when he was dead, I had permission, because of my aliveness and because I had learned some things, to express to him my anger, hurt, pain, and sorrow in an honest way that I never could express to him when he was alive. I don't know why that happened. I do know that it did happen. And I know that a lot of people, one of their fears, particularly as I begin to share with other people about my unfinished business with my father, their fears came up and said, oh my God, I've got to go talk to my mother, father, so that I won't have those problems when they die. So I shared with my father all of these feelings and told him directly what I felt. I told him what he could take to his grave. I think it's very important that if we don't want energy, this is about energy. In the Celestine Prophecy, a book that's referenced at the end of this, I encourage all of you to read that, to study about systems and energy and how it impacts us all. And I told my father these things that I didn't want about him that he could take to his grave. And it was amazing, because this energy, it left my body. I didn't carry it anymore. And there were some things about him that I wanted to have. And it's important to learn to ask for what you want. What specifically is it that you want from this person? Again, if grief recovery is simply about telling the truth, we must also ask from that person or from that situation whatever it is that we want. Put it out there and see if we can get it. And I did ask, and my father did exchange this energy and gave me what it was that I wanted. So there is that exchange. It's not it's an experiential thing. But I encourage you to, you can set this up in a psychodrama, you can set this up in role play, a lot of different ways that you can help people recreate experiences if they didn't have that unique experience that I somehow was blessed to have. The other important thing, I think, in grief with parents that we learn is the value of saying what you need to say when people are around. This is something that also comes up for people when a parent does die. And sometimes people will should on themselves and say, well, I should have said this, well, I should have said that. And if they haven't, I'll be teaching you some tools later on so that people can say whatever it is that they need to say and move away. The last loss I'll talk about before we go to our break is the loss of a child to parents. This child represented something to these parents, not just a little person. It represented something to the mother, something to the father. And this is taken away, this is yanked away. It's unfair. They've got a belief that says that I'm supposed to die before my child. I bring my child into the world, I die, my child carries on. And this changes that. It seems unreal, it's unnatural. And so it's important to work with parents to this natural sense of unnaturalness and fairness as they go through. It's important that you honor the feeling and never tell a parent that they can have another child. If it's a young parent, a young family, and they lose a child, never tell them that they can replace that loss. Do not engage in that myth-producing activity. Help them feel their feelings for this child, for what it represented to them, for all the dreams. Maybe at birth they'd already put the child in college or found them the school. All these dreams of things that they would have done with that child need to be incorporated into their grief process to help them complete those relationships. In this day of AIDS, this is something that I think we're going to see more and more, and we already are seeing it. Thousands and thousands of children are dying, leaving these parents at young ages on the planet, and their children are dead. They need an experience of grieving the loss of those dreams and that relationship to help them complete those ideas, those dreams and beliefs. There's an entire belief system about what happens in the families. The whole system, the siblings, as well as the partnership, needs to heal. It's incredible how many divorces there are when a child dies. And so you might look at in the assessment phase when or what happened in the relationships when the death occurred, when the child's when the child occurred and what happened in the dynamics of the relationship, and help make sense for that griever out of their normal natural reaction to that loss. We're going to take a short break now and then come back with some other skills for grief recovery. Thank you. Welcome back. This talk on grief as a reaction to loss and addiction recovery. We've got 50 more minutes. And we were talking about, the last one was loss of a child. And what I want to say as I go through all these losses, it's very important for you as a clinician when you're working with people to work for you, not to judge the loss, as well as to work with the group to help them learn not to judge the loss that the griever is talking about in this process. See, our judgment sets up a unsafe place for people to do their work. And there is no loss in the mind of the griever that's, they decide the severity of that. And so someone can lose a jet airplane because of a lifestyle change, and someone can lose a child, and neither of those is more significant than the other. What we need to do is honor the griever. It's the griever's reality that we're dealing with. And so if we can move out of judgment and help them focus on their feelings, then they can do their healing work by having the feelings that are unique to them for that relationship to what it is that they lost. And so they can really experience effective change and recovery. When we get into loss of lifestyle through marriage, divorce, separation, job change, getting one or losing one, staying out of prison, jail, or mental institutions, there's a myriad of feelings that go along with this. In marriage, again, it's loss of being single is the loss that occurs. And I heard a wonderful story about a couple when they were married. They went off and they had a beautiful time, and prior to the marriage, and both families were there. And the daughter brought her parents out one at a time, and she told her mother how wonderful her life had been with her, as well as some things that she needed to impart to her mother that she didn't like, that she didn't want to carry into her marriage and to do to her children what was done to her. Then she brought her father out and told him the same things. And then she told them things together. And what happened in that honest exchange is this young woman was able to move from, let's say, being the daughter in the family to completing that relationship with mom and dad so that she could start her relationship with her husband and then move into her new life. Because the third thing she did was bring her husband in, and even though they knew him, she introduced him in a new way now that she had said what she needed to say over here. So it's about, completion work is about releasing one way of living so that we can have another way. Not about replacing, but just allowing this to go so this can come in a very natural flow. In divorce, it's very helpful or important, I believe, to help people set up and create some very effective recovery rituals for divorce. And that can be either at the client's home or at your office or wherever the client happens to want to do this, to, let's say, go through the pictures of the marriage and to talk about and to be given permission to talk about the good and the bad in that marriage, what it meant. What were the dreams that are no longer going to be now that that marriage doesn't exist? The things that they were going to have together, what did they aspire for? What was that favorite song that they'll have to respond to differently now? What are all those relationships? When they're dividing up the property, are they allowed to talk about their feelings about, I'll no longer have this and I've got this instead, and just give them permission and bring this up, and maybe you'll have them create a divorce party. We have showers. Let's have a shower for divorce and bring the people in and start talking about that. In the 1800s, since when there were no rituals for divorce at all, there's a story of a lady who had nothing. She didn't really know what to do when she was getting divorced, so she dressed herself up, put a black dress on, and went around and told all of her neighbors that she was getting divorced, just like she would do if she was getting married. She did the same process for the divorce, to begin to let her know and to make it real for her, and to let other people know and to make it real for them. So we need to create a ritual for divorce that helps people say what they need to say to the partner, not just the anger stuff, but the good stuff too, the part that their dreams were made of, and now those dreams are no more, and to give them permission to say that, so they don't immediately go out and replace that partner with someone else. See, this isn't about family of origin work. This is about doing nuclear family work, doing the nuclear family work, completing this one relationship, so they can at least, if they try to do family of origin work and replace this one, at least this one is completed. So we're at least instituting some ideas to help people release relationships one at a time. Through separation, again, we're not really given much permission at all in our society to have our feelings about someone that we've been dating. And here I think it's important to, again, listening, paying attention to what the client has to say, and noticing what are your relationships. Maybe they'll do later I'll talk about it, it's called relationship graph or a lost history graph, and notice all these relationships. Which were the relationships that were significant in their life? The romantic relationships, which were significant to them. And did they say everything they needed to say to that person? Are there any unfinished emotions that need to be expressed? Again, giving permission to go back and have those feelings. Remember when I talked at the beginning about that myth that we were taught, a lot of us, there's more fish in the sea? Well, if it's a separation that occurred, that could be the immediate thought process and belief that jumped up in their life that disallowed them from having their feelings and moved them into repression or some other way of negating that emotional reality. So if we can open up the possibility for people to have their feelings about just separations, then at least they're free of that emotional baggage that they've been carrying for years. When there's been a job change, and let's say the person has more money than they've ever had before, and they have to give up poverty or give up a lesser lifestyle, so to speak. It's interesting, very, very interesting. The people that have won the $1 million lotteries, studies seem to show, or do show, that most people keep their money, no matter what the winnings, for about 3 years. Then they go back to the place that they started. If people don't complete or finish a lifestyle or a belief system about a lifestyle, they'll do everything in their power to go back to where they were. So when we do get job changes, either we get a job or we lose a job and something occurs, there's losses that are happening. And if people are given permission to have their feelings about those losses and those changes, again, if what grief is a reaction to loss, then people are freed up to experience whatever they will in this brand new set of life experiences. Staying out of prison is a loss. I mean, a lot of people don't think of it that way, but talk to the people that are in, let's say, some of the community corrections treatment programs. In Houston, there's a center called New Directions, and they have birthdays for people or celebration or anniversary dates for the ex-cons that stay out of prison for the first year. Well, they go to 6 months, 8 months, 1 year, similar to what the 12-step programs do by offering chips or acknowledgement for periods of time for a changed behavior. If an individual has a belief that says, I'll always be in the penitentiary, and now they get out of the penitentiary and they're no longer there, there were certain relationships, beliefs, and lifestyles that they will no longer have if they stay out here in the world and have to accept responsibility for their actions out here. And so there is a loss that occurs if they don't go back. And it's important that we set up an environment for people that we know that come out of that situation, for them to have all the feelings they need to have in order to release that lifestyle. in order to let it go, in order to move beyond it. Same with the people that have been or spent a lot of time in mental institutions. There's a certain life, it's like a marriage. It's like there's someone there all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, deciding for the individual what they'll do, what they'll wear, when they'll eat, where they'll go, when they'll do it. And when that no longer occurs, that's a major loss. Remember, grief is that reaction, that conflicting mass of human emotion that occurs when people reach out to someone or something that's always been there, and they reach out for it one last time, and it's no longer there. When the addict finally gets to that point in their recovery where they really buy into the idea that they are an addict, and they accept that, that's a grief. They grieve the loss of the chemical. They grieve the loss of the lifestyle. They know, because grief is that understanding that is not going to be there anymore. They know they'll never go back to that. It can't ever be the way that it was. And people need to be allowed to have all the feelings, all that conflicting mass of human emotion in order for them to move through that process. Again, moving into loss of alcohol, drugs, or other addictive behavior. Identity loss. Who am I if I'm not an addict? Loss of something to rely on. These are major losses for the person. I mean, talk to any addict that you want to, and they will tell you that the addiction, if they're honest, has been more significant than any other being in their life, including them. Including them. And now they're not going to do it anymore. There's a lot of feelings that go along with that. When the addict releases that and says, I won't do that to me anymore. That is no longer an option for me. I cannot engage in that behavior anymore. I release the need for chemicals in my life. I can't go to those bars anymore. Where will I go on Saturday night? All this confusion. Remember when we started off this? Disbelief, numbness, denial, anxiety, fear, sadness, despair, guilt, isolation, remorse. All these feelings of the conflicting mass of human emotion that occurs. So when addicts want to romance their history, allow that to happen. Let them talk about the good times of the addiction because they were there. Let them talk about the survivors of abuse that are in abusive relationships today, that come out of an abusive, physically abusive or sexually abusive marriage. Let them talk about the good of that relationship, meaning the value that it was for them that kept them there, as well as the pain. Give them space to tell the whole truth about that reality. If we do that, then there's less of a need for people to continue to want to reconnect with that so they can complete it. If we help them complete it now, there's less need to recreate it again because it's a complete issue. It's finished, it's handled, so to speak. Now we move into surviving loss through suicide or through murder. Had some suicides in the Yeager family. It's incredible what happens to people when there's been suicide. And the secrets that people are asked to continue to keep going, the silence that people are asked to continue to keep going. Let's bury this. People get embarrassed. They don't want to acknowledge it. The parents certainly don't want to acknowledge it. They don't want to look at what they did. They may become guilt-ridden, so they don't have to look at anything else. They may take all the responsibility away from the person that committed suicide. And isn't it interesting, when we hear about suicide on the news, that most times everyone says, they had a charmed life. We had no indication at all that something was going on. So there's a tremendous amount of shock that has been going on, or the denial of the abuses that have occurred or the problems that have occurred in the family surface, and people want to continue to be in their delusion and denial about that. And so with suicide, again, we're not given permission in our society, even by the church or by the law, to do that. So the person has broken the law. Suicide is generally an act of anger, severe anger towards self and other people. People don't want to engage in that. It's also very interesting that in families where there has been suicide, there's about a 50% probability, statistics show, that other family members, younger family members in particular, will commit suicide themselves. Not because the suicide is hereditary, it's because people have repressed their feelings about it. No one has been given permission to experience what they need to say about that experience. When I had a cousin commit suicide, and the family wasn't allowed to talk to her before she jumped off the San Francisco Bridge and she lived. And she went back up to the bridge a month later, and this time when she jumped, she died. And that was hush-hush in the Yeager family. We weren't allowed to talk about it, or even when she was in the hospital in between, to contact her. It was like, we're going to keep this under the cover, so to speak. We'll not let it out. So the secrecy around that, the shame, the family shame around that, is one of the things that needs to be gotten over and through in order for recovery to take place. Particularly working with the siblings, the younger brothers and sisters. At some level, they hear that suicide's okay, that it's all right for me to do this. That because there's no ritual, there's no way that they can have that reality. They can have their emotional reality because the family is repressing that, actively involved in suppressing it. Now we move into murder. When there's been a murder, and family members or society is going to be engaged in that process, and usually in a murder situation there's court involvement. There's a lot of things, a lot of activity that's going on. Again, going back to what the men tend to do, men tend to want to go out and fight and to kill and to take advantage and to get revenge, so to speak. The Death Wish movies are based on that. Here's this guy who goes out and tries to fight violence because of the violence done to his family. And his whole thing is never dealing with his feelings, but always going out there and taking some action against someone else instead of simply having the feelings, and then maybe figuring out some way to take action. But here's the man's way to go out and to do the action. So also in murder, we want to go out and do something, make something happen. Maybe there's going to be depression. There was a story on one of the news stations, CNN, about this woman in one of the war-ridden countries, and she was raging at the troops all the time because they had taken her son. And that's all she did was rage and rage and rage. She never let her have her feelings about that. She was stuck in the anger, the vengeance. She would throw things at the trucks just to vent her anger. This went on for months and months and months. And there was no resolution for this lady because she was caught up in the senselessness of the violence. So here again, it's important to give people a safe environment for them to talk about those feelings and to share those feelings and to move through that process by acknowledging and honoring the feelings that are appropriate for that situation. Again, communication skills that can be used with the griever in order for them to experience their reality. One statement to make, and I really encourage you to learn this. When you're talking with a griever and they're telling you about their story, make this true statement. Even if the same thing has happened to you, make this statement. I have no idea how you feel about that, because you don't. You have no idea. If your father died, your mother died, your sister died, if there was a murder, whatever it was, you have no idea how they feel, even though the same thing happened to you. You have a different set of emotions. They have a different set of emotions. Honor them. Don't pacify them. Don't try to take their grief away by attempting to bond with them in a way that you can't. They have their own unique feelings. You have no idea how they feel. Honor them. It's very important. Also make statements to them like, and even teach them to state, I feel when you died, left, whatever, because, and then what that brings up, the abandonment, the sense of isolation, and then have them express what they want from the person, place, or thing that's no longer in their life. Have them have or teach them a whole set of communication skills so they can experience their reality the way that it is for them. They can tell that truth about that relationship. What you can also say when they're in the midst of debriefing their experiences, what I heard you say was, and just parrot it back to them. Simply parrot it back. In that process of parroting, they will get that you are really there for them to hear. And you're not there to take their feelings away. You're not going to fix them because they know they're not broken. They're real clear that they're not broken, that they're perfectly fine with their feelings. And all they really need is some safe place for them to experience that reality. And if you simply parrot it back every now and then, they get that they've been understood. And when they tell you about the loss initially, what you might do is make a very simple statement. Can you tell me what happened? Tell me about it. Might be the communication response that you give back to them that can open up the door for them to begin to tell their truth about that experience or about those experiences. In treatment strategies, we're looking at individual, group, family, couples, just like any other process. A variety of things may work for the griever in order to help them through their grief experience so they can really tell the truth about their reality. There might be experiential therapies. Gestalt therapy is a great way, particularly if the loss, this can be, again, back to loss of trust, loss of safety and security through incest or abuse, loss of a chemical, loss of someone through death, and the death occurred a long time ago. Gestalt therapy is a great way to help people go back and put them back into that experience in a safe environment and recreate that reality. In life training, they call it go back to the life shock and to re-experience all those feelings that for a variety of reasons the griever wasn't allowed to or didn't experience at the time of the loss, which is now why they're carrying all this excess baggage with them and doing whatever they're doing in order to repress it. And so in Gestalt therapy, it's a powerful, powerful way to help people experience that reality that they couldn't experience before. Or if the loss is recent, you might set it up for them anyway. If it's a death, then in a Gestalt experience, you might lay someone out, put someone out and put a sheet over them and say, what's that like? Tell that body there, tell that image what your feelings are about this loss. Giving them permission that they didn't have at the time to experience their aliveness, which is what we're talking about, and to move out of survival into aliveness, which is grief recovery. Moving out of the survival mode into aliveness, which is having all the feelings that were there at the time. And now it's okay to do that. It's safe and it's protected. And that helps them honor who they are as people. Voice dialogue, an excellent way. I got a tape or a lesson on that on Psychology of Cells, Meeting and Treating the Addict by Drs. Hal and Sidra Winkleman. And in that, or Halstone and Sidra Winkleman, yeah. And in that process of that particular approach, you can talk to the part that is sad. You can talk to the part that's angry. You can talk to multiple aspects of that individual and honor each part. Talk to the part that wants to experience their feelings and talk to the part that's afraid of feeling their feelings. And honoring all aspects. And in that process, the individual can gain some recognition and understanding of who they are and of how they're responding to this loss. Therapeutic touch is another wonderful way to help people get back in touch with who they are. If there's been disassociation, if they just left because the trauma was too great, therapeutic touch is a way for them to begin to connect with who they are, to begin to come back in and to experience the aliveness and the vibrance of just life itself, their own life itself. And so, again, in my practice, I've used it very effectively. And when my father died, I did have a massage therapist come to the house and do massage therapy on my mother. Very, very effective to help her feel her feelings and to move away from some of the psychic numbness that she had created in order to help her get through that very trying experience. Ropes or experiential therapy is a great approach because that teaches trust, that teaches reliance on self and others. And if one of the things that has happened in the loss experience or the grief is that they lost trust in someone being there for them, ropes will certainly allow for that to happen. Many hospitals have that, have ropes courses set up, so I'd encourage that as a very effective tool to help people deal with their grief and loss issues. Moving now into the process, again, that John James describes in the book, the Grief Recovery Handbook, a step-by-step program for moving through loss. And again, you can get a lot more information about this by taking his course, and his address and phone number are referenced at the end of the tape. I really, really encourage people, if you really want to do this work, to go out and find out more about it, and that's an excellent way to do that. As he states, the grief is a normal, natural reaction to loss. So first of all, we have to notice what the losses are. So we create a timeline graph, just a real simple on a sheet of paper. And notice all the losses from birth until the present moment. We want to go through life. What are all the losses? What we want is consciousness. In consciousness, people can connect with who they are. Out of consciousness, they can't. So we want conscious recovery here. We want the intention to be honest with self about what has occurred in their life. Some people say, Mike, I've had thousands of losses. I'll take hundreds of sheets of paper. I hand them one sheet of paper and I say, then start the process. Start the process. I hear that you have had a lot of losses. Let's start the process. And I ask them also not to judge the losses as one being insignificant, and I don't even want to put that down. I say put all the losses down. And when I was doing this at one time with a client, he put down the loss of this little glass rabbit. And when he wrote it down, it was no big deal for him. He was just a little kid, just put down on the bottom of the line, below the line, lost my glass rabbit, age 6. And when he was sharing that later on, come to find out that when he said, and my glass rabbit broke, all these feelings began to come up. And being the man that he was, he wanted to immediately go on and fix it and to move through the process. But we came back to it. Come to find out that his relationship to that rabbit was that when he was growing up, that was all he had to talk to. That was his best bud. He took that rabbit around in his little wagon all around the house and the neighborhood and talked to it all the time. Primary relationship for him. And when the glass rabbit broke, well-meaning mother probably said, don't worry about that, we'll get you a new one. Discounted all the feelings, never allowed to have his reality about that relationship. Was judging himself in his adult mind about how he should have felt about it as a child, and didn't let him tell the truth. So in this process of identifying all those losses, that came up. He was able to say what he needed to say about the rabbit, and then say goodbye, and then move on, and complete that relationship, primary relationship with him that had affected how he had related to other people from that point on. He made a decision when the rabbit was broken, I can't trust people to be there for me. And that was a child's decision based on that child's reality that he had assumed was the truth and had attached that decision to every other relationship up to this point here. So by clearing that one up, a lot of these other decisions and feelings of distrust began to move away because the original pain had been addressed and healed. He told the truth, had experienced that truth, and had moved through. Another experience that I had in identifying losses, and I say this because I think it's so significant that we don't judge any of our clients' losses. A lady had been very wealthy, and when there was some major financial problems that had occurred, the family lost the corporate jet. She had a lot of feelings about not being able to take the jet anywhere anymore. She judged herself harshly because she compared herself with everybody else who didn't have a jet and who now didn't have a home and didn't have a lot of other things. So instead of her honoring her own feelings, she made a comparison. Society certainly helped her make that comparison with that, it's a poem, it's a story, it's probably a good one, but when it comes to grievers, it certainly stops people from having their feelings. It says, I was feeling bad about having no shoes until I met a man who had no feet. And that's true. There's a lot to be grateful for in life. But what that little poetry bit does is that it discounts the griever's feelings. So what she needed in order to heal was to have all the feelings in a safe environment and not be judged for being sad that she couldn't go to the Bahamas or to Europe whenever she wanted. She needed that in order for her to heal. It was like I watched a transformation take place just by being quiet and saying, tell me about that. What was that like for you? And she went on and told of her sadness and her anger and her confusion. Her life had been changed. She got insecure about it. All these feelings that she had harbored because of self and societal judgment, all those negative feelings began to dissipate when she could simply tell the truth. So it's about learning not to judge people when they identify their losses. You'll notice, clients will notice, that when they've completed this loss history graph, that some of their losses they are really complete with. They're handled, they're done, there's no more emotion. It's not, they know they're not repressing these feelings. They know that it's really complete. So they now have consciousness, again the place we're trying to raise for people, they now have consciousness that these losses have occurred. And they have consciousness of what it's like to really feel complete with some, as well as noticing that they're still using repression over here and delusion and denial over here. And so they're beginning to have awareness about what's going on. We need the awareness in order to heal. If we don't have awareness, we don't know that we've had a loss. If we don't know that we've had a loss, then there can be no grief work. So this process of noticing which losses are complete, which losses are incomplete, is absolutely necessary in order for people to move through this process. So after they've done that, they pick one loss and write a relationship graph. And they go back and write it down on a sheet of paper. What are the positive aspects of that relationship, and what are the negative aspects of that relationship? What do I still need to say? What did they do for me? What did I do to them? Noticing all aspects. Again, in the process of the first graph, the loss history graph, what you want people to be aware of is what are the myths that they have been taught about experiencing or not experiencing their losses. Don't feel bad, replace the loss, we'll get you a new one on Saturday, grieve alone, don't trust, whatever the myth was. Have them become conscious for each loss, which of those myths that they were taught did they apply to that particular loss. Then it's important for them to notice what feelings were repressed about that particular loss, what feelings came up, what feelings did they allow to go under, what kind of, were there any accidents that occurred in their life at or about the time of that loss? Again, trying to raise some consciousness for the individual. Really what we're looking at here is what did they do? What was their reaction to the loss? What was their thought processes? What happened to them physically? What happened to them relationally in the rest of the world? How did they handle it? What did they do? You want them to take a look back at their lives to see what they did. And again, what we're looking for here and what's helpful here is they can begin to get a pattern for how they think and how they act and react. That awareness, again, awareness in and of itself doesn't do anything. It just makes for very well-educated sick people. But awareness is paramount if there's going to be change. So again, in this process of identifying the losses and how they handled it, we now move into a loss that's incomplete. What do we still need to say? What are the amends that we still need to make to this person that we're incomplete with? Meaning, what did I do to them? What do I need to say I'm sorry for? It doesn't matter what they did to you or to the griever. It matters what the individual, what the griever did to this person, place, or thing. What amends do they need to make? If they're going to complete their relationship, they need to tell the truth. And possibly, particularly if there's been resentment, anywhere along the line, they have focused only on what was done to them. And one thing I know for sure, anytime people hold on to resentment, they're never going to get away from it. They'll continue to be involved with situations like that. There's a story about how they catch monkeys over in Africa. Interesting about how this works. There's method to the madness here. The monkey catchers go out and place this little cage out there, and they put some food in the cage. Then they have a hole in the cage, and the monkey sticks their hand in the cage, and the monkey grabs a hold of the food. And what's interesting about monkeys is that monkeys, once they have grabbed the food, they won't let it go. And so when the monkey catcher comes back, sometimes they found, well, the hand of the monkey is always very bruised and bloody because the monkey's been trying to pull the hand out. Sometimes they found the hand gnawed off with the fist still clenched around the food. It's interesting that how the monkey catcher frees the monkey is they pry the food from his hand, and when the hand is open, it comes out easily and effortlessly. When people hold on to resentment, which is refilling old hurt, they continue to create situations just like the old one and continue to have the similar problems they've experienced all of their life. So when people are into resentment and refuse, just flat refuse in recovery to look at both sides of the coin, I have them do a very simple thing. I learned this in sales. What's the payoff? What do you get from holding on to the resentment? What's the payoff? And most people say, well, I don't get anything. I ask them, well, do you get to be self-righteous? Do you get to, does that allow you to continue with addictive behavior? Do you get to still be depressed? What do you get from it? Do you get to have a sense of safety? Do you get to have a sense of relationship with self that means something out of that abuse? What do you get from it? And then I ask them what it cost them. What's the emotional cost? When they notice what the emotional cost is, and they compare that with the payoff, if the cost outweighs the benefit, then it's amazing how fast resentment slips away. If the cost doesn't outweigh the benefit, it's amazing how hard they hold on to the resentment. You need to challenge people at this point when they get into, let's say, refusing, to look at the idea that there might be a positive or a negative to a relationship. There's sometimes people will get into what I call memorializing relationships, and they'll only look at the good. Worked with a woman one time whose father died when she was very young, and he was a great dad, wonderful dad. And when he died, the whole family shut down because the dad was there to do the providing. The mother didn't know how to do providing. The young girl had to become an adult at that point. She focused all of her feelings on her mother and never on her dad. And that's not to say that her mom did anything wrong or her dad did anything wrong. That was just how she handled it. Very difficult for this lady to go back in and look at anything negative that might have been associated with her father. So she memorialized him, so she could not tell the truth about that relationship. And this isn't about you find terrible, damning things about someone. It's just about noticing that for a relationship, for us to be in relationship, there's usually positive and negative aspects. This is about noticing them. So with people that are memorializing relationships, I ask them, I challenge them to find 3 bad things or 3 negative things or 3 less than positive things. Frame it in such a way so that people will get it and do the work and begin to notice that there are 2 sides to that coin. Conversely, if you've got someone who dramatizes the relationship, this certainly is run-of-the-mill in addiction recovery as well as in abuse recovery, that people want to only dramatize and look for the negative about this person that has created harm or havoc in their life, that they're grieving the loss of that person or that idea. And what I ask those people to do is I challenge them and say, find 3 positive things. When I was first challenged to do this grief work, I did it with my father when he was still alive. And at that time, I was hard-pressed to find some positives. I had just, for so many years, had just focused on the negative. Very difficult for me to look at the positive. And so I came up with, well, he put clothes on my back. He put me in college, and he fed me. Made great fried chicken. Francis made excellent fried chicken, the very, very best. Sorry, Mom. I mean, Pops was, yours is good, Pops is real good. And I hear my brother Nicky's makes very good chicken, too. But in this case, dealing with my father, I only looked at what was negative about him. What was negative? And so I was challenged and saw a bigger picture. My relationship with him expanded when I looked at the positive. And I think we really do need to challenge our patients to look at both sides of the coin. What I know about anger and resentment is that anger does not complete itself. It stays in a cycle, goes around and around and around and around, never goes anywhere. So if we're going to complete a relationship, we need to look at both sides of the coin. We need to look at both sides of the coin. So the other thing we need to look at after all that work is done on this relationship, from when the relationship started until now. And it's important here to say that, let's say if this is a divorce or a separation or a death, and the relationship started here, and then the death, separation, or divorce happened here, but now we've got all this time here, you also need to put down there all the dreams, hopes lost, whatever that happened in between here and here. How the individual maybe still be giving them their energy and the losses that occur from that. And put down all the losses up until today. Have them complete that relationship up until today. Another interesting thing you can do with this process is have them write a graph, a relationship graph to themselves, and to notice everything about themselves, the positive and negative relationship they've had with themselves throughout their life up to this point here. Very healing when people are willing to do that, to notice all of those positive and negative aspects about self, and to really take that in and to notice what they're still incomplete with. How is the individual still damning themselves, running into shame on themselves, guilting themselves, being angry at themselves. Just notice that. So we want to look at all that's incomplete. We're looking at the amends, what we did to them, also forgiveness. What do we still need to forgive this person for? Here again, back into cost and payoff. If someone says, I refuse to forgive that person because, and they go into the litany of why, you challenge them, what's the cost and what's the payoff, and then go back to the idea of forgiveness, which is letting go of the idea or the possibility of a different or better yesterday. And if they're willing to acknowledge forgiveness for this person, they're beginning to release that relationship. The resentment holds on to it, forgiveness releases it, which is the end result that we're pushing for here. Then they've identified all the undelivered communications, everything they still need to say. This is where I bring in Dr. John Gray's love letter, From What You Feel You Can Heal. He's got a wonderful process, kind of expanded what John James did, and gave us this letter form that looks at the anger, the fear, the hurt, the pain, the sorrow, forgiveness, and amends, and puts it all out there. And then I've changed the text from John Gray, What You Feel You Can Heal, and I put the word goodbye. That goes back into what John James is talking about and what grief recovery is about. After you've said all you need to say, after you've said everything that you need to say, will you say goodbye to the pain? Will you release the pain? And it's important to stress that for people. See, it's not really letting go the relationship, because they're always going to be in a relationship with the person, thing, or event at some level. This is about releasing the pain of the memory of that relationship, so they're free to go on and live their lives. And in that process of saying goodbye, when they've said that, I really encourage them to do this with another person face to face, looking at each other in the eye, going for that connection. Again, what happens in grief is that the connection is broken. Grief recovery is about having connection. And so if people are willing to sit close and look eye to eye at each other, that can be you with your client, or put two clients together, or whatever, two family members together, have them look into the eye of the other person, and then again they're role-playing the person, thing, or event that's left, and say goodbye to that. It's amazing how many feelings show up when that's done. When the patient is doing this with their relationship to chemicals, and they said everything they need to say to the chemical, they say goodbye to the chemical, to that lifestyle, to those beliefs. It's incredibly powerful to watch that release take place, and it does in every case if they've told the truth. You can also use this for people that have through operations lost different parts of their body, and they say goodbye to that body part that's no longer there, for cancer victims, breast cancer victims, other people that have lost parts of their lung, or through limbs, to say goodbye to that. With women that have lost children through abortion in particular, and in the addiction recovery field we see that a lot, have them give the child a name and say everything they needed to say to that unborn child, and then say goodbye to the pain associated with that relationship. And let them complete that relationship with the unborn and move on so they can drop their guilt and shame that they may have about that. So the loss history graph, or the timeline graph, accounts for all the losses. Then we move into the closure letter, which assists the griever in uncovering and communicating all of their feelings. In that process, it's finished and handled at that point. We end with the idea that grievers aren't broken and they don't need to be fixed. They need a safe environment to tell the truth. Don't judge the loss or their reaction to it. Help people create some kind of a ritual. When my father died, usually in memorial cards, they're the standard cards, well, the family got together and we put his picture on the cover of one, and put his birth date and death date and sobriety date, and put a Thomas Merton prayer on the back. So we personalized the card to my father. So this meant something to us. We have memorialized, and this is how we keep that going. When my Uncle James died, I wasn't in Houston. He was very important to me, and when he died, my father gave me his cane, and I keep it in my office, and it's what I use as a source of strength. Whenever I'm feeling that I'm unsure about what's happening in my life, or I get scared, I go to Uncle James's cane. In our relationship, he let me support him with this cane, and I let him support me emotionally and just to be there with me in a lot of different ways. So we supported each other, and this is what I keep from him. So help people do whatever it is to find meaning in their life as they move through this process of grief and release. If people are allowed to have their feelings, and we can carry people through this process and stay out of judgment. Judgment is such a killer of honesty, and let people tell their truth. I mean, in essence, that's what it's all about, is can we create a safe environment for people to simply tell the truth? That's it. What this person meant to me was. What I still need to say is, and then I need to say goodbye and to release that pain. When this process is finished and people still have other stuff, residual stuff comes up, it's a very simple process. You have them, first of all, tell the truth, or notice, be in consciousness, that they still need to say something else to this person, place, or thing. So be conscious about that and move out of judgment, and then simply say it. And that can be like I'm talking to you now, and let's say I have a memory of my father, or of chemicals, or of to my abuser. I was sexually abused when I was 4. I have a memory of my abuser. And so I am in communication with you, but I notice, because of consciousness, and that's again what recovery is about, is being conscious. It's about noticing that I have broken, or you get your client to notice that they have broken communication. And to stop the communication, tell the truth and say, excuse me, I've got something to say to someone that's not here. I'll get back with you in a moment. Tell the truth. That's what it's about, telling the truth. No longer repressing what needs to say, no longer shoving it down and moving it aside and minimizing it, but simply honoring it. I need to say something. And then you look to the side and you say it, just in your head. Have them say it in their head. What I need to tell you is, I'm hurt, angry, sorry, joyful, whatever, about whatever it is that they're having those feelings about, and I need to tell you about that. Goodbye. So you say what you need to say, you carry it all the way through, finish the entire frame of thought, go through all the emotions that are necessary in order for them to tell that truth, and then say goodbye again. And some people say, how many times do you have to do that? Well, as many times as it comes up. That's it, as many times as it shows up. But what I've found is that after people do the initial bit of the grief work and really get into the feelings and say everything that they need to say that first time, the other stuff is significant, but it doesn't ever seem to have the power that the first one did. It's not near as powerful. it begins to diminish over time. Remember, we're talking about completion. And if people can attach the emotion, the honest emotion, to the words, say what they need to say honestly in a safe environment, and then say goodbye, they complete it. And they move on, and they heal. And in that healing, that then allows them, because they're in an honest relationship with self, to be in a relationship with other people. So, through the feeling is the healing, is the bottom line. And I really do encourage people to study more about grief, and I really thank you for being here with this lesson from me today. Thank you very much.
Lockhart.
First African-American female astronaut?
Correct. Who is Dr. Mae Jimerson? First, the answer, first